So, just to kind of remind us, we're continuing on the Master Plan of Evangelism series. I kind of want to thank you. We're actually heading towards the end. We're pretty close. I think we got one more week on this. If it'll zoom in so I can actually read it. But I want you to kind of think about the last couple weeks as different installments of maybe a new hit TV series called The Internship. Kind of like The Apprenticeship, except I've never seen it, so maybe not. Probably not. I hear it's kind of terrible, actually. But anyways, that's not the point. So our first week, we really talked about selection. It's Jesus kind of picking the contestants, right? His apostles and disciples, his outreach. It's going out there and finding people, right? It's our initial step to evangelism. It's how we meet people. Then he talks about association. As we're coming along, as we're trying to evangelize, we need to spend some time with those people, right? So we may have a large core people, group of people. Jesus definitely had large crowds at some point in time. But a lot of times, when he was really working on his plan for evangelism to continue on his work into the future, he had a core group of people, right? Pulled into a workspace, so at like work, right? That would look like maybe, a bunch of people in a team that are in cubicles, right? They're co-located and they're kind of focused, have a very focused attention, right? And they might have just kind of a single mentor or manager that's kind of looking over them, kind of working through that. We talked about them being consecrated, right? Setting aside the desires of our hearts, our wants in favor of those things that Jesus has taught us, being sacrificial. Even just this idea of being humble, right? Paul talks about it. It was very much the opposite of even what like the Roman society thought as being okay. Like being humble was a very bad thing. It was not something that was looked hard upon. We talked about how he imparted wisdom. He gave them briefs or lessons, right? This is where you have team meetings and you pass on that kind of information, right? This is, again, we're talking a little bit about the TV show, The Internship. So it's like you have new people that are onboarding. Hey, we have this mission. Let me impart to you these teachings so you can do my work, right? And demonstrates it, right? Like, so at my work, we do a lot of science. So we have these science experiments. So a lot of times what we'll do is we'll bring in our interns. We'll show them how to do it once or twice. And then we say, okay, and that's our demonstration, right? We're showing them how to do it. And then we kind of turn around, and this is a little bit of what Ed talked about last week, is delegations, being able to turn around and say, okay, let's give you some roles. Let's give you some tasks, right? Ed talked about a bit about how, Jesus ultimately started sending them out in twos, right? He didn't send them out individually. They weren't totally isolated, even in their I can't be louder. Nothing I can do about it. Okay, so I guess I got told I could be louder. I'm not sure how to do that. Give me 2 seconds to see if there's a thing I can change on my phone.
Yeah, like some people can't hear us.
I don't see a volume. I'll try to be louder. Shouting my own house, but hey, whatever. No one's here. Not going to bother anybody, right? So, like I was saying, so Ed had talked about again that they had gone out 2 by 2. Again, they were still in association. They still were like together, right? So they had kind of a peer. There was some individual support, and as they broke out to different towns and villages, we initially heard the fact that they went out. He sent the apostles out, just the kind of 12. And later on, he sent out 70 or 72, depending on your translation. It has to do with different manuscripts, right? I personally like to go with the 72 because that means in total, when Jesus sends people out, there's 84 people, which is 7 times 12. Numerology, hey, whatever, what floats your boat. 70 is also a really cool number, right? It's 7 times 10, whatever. But imagine as disciples, or as his disciples, basically what he did is he handed them out a certificate with something like the following inscription. Hey, Jim Colwell. He is bestowed with the rights, responsibilities, privileges as afforded to those with the rank of evangelist for Christ. And he is hereby commissioned to go into all the world, teaching everyone everything Christ has conferred upon him. So his final role, the Great Commission, sending them out, that is what they got, right? And so this week we're going to talk a bit about what it looks like as an intern to be supervised, right? Very much this is a thing with internships. We give them roles, and then they're supervised. We don't just send them out into the wind, right? They get a new role. We teach them what their new responsibilities are, but that doesn't mean they automatically are successful, right? Again, we don't just release them and say, yay, verily, you became a disciple. We gave you a Bible, and now everything's going to be hunky-dory, right? Right? We don't do that in our life. Why would we do it as disciples? Oh, I just skipped pages. I was supposed to go one page. So, think about like this with their kids, right? We say, go clean your room. We don't just do that, right? Especially when they're little, we show them. We might sing the song, clean up, right? So they pick up their stuff. But we know that doesn't mean forever their bedroom's going to be clean. Especially if you just show them once. We got to do it again and again with them. A manager, if he gives you something challenging, we don't automatically just have it knocked out, right? But a lot of times they'll give you tasks that kind of stretch your limits, that kind of put you out there. Oftentimes, and certainly at my work, it's to stretch my ability. Sometimes it takes me out of my comfort zone because maybe they need someone to fill a role. But ultimately, every single time I meet with one of my lower managers, he talks about the fact is, I think you can do this. I want you to grow in this way, and that's why I'm giving these tasks. Think about when you go to the gym. If you have a personal trainer, or for Liz and I, we go to CrossFit. Every single time we've got a coach that's there, and they're pushing us. I guess that goes for sports too, right? You're on a football team, soccer team, or whatever. You'll have a coach that's kind of pushing you, and they'll say, okay, give me one more. Think about Facing the Giants. If you guys have seen that movie, there's a really amazing scene where one of the boys is just having a really bad attitude, and the coach says, okay, we're going to do this exercise, and we're going to do it blindfolded, and we're going to go, I can't remember, I want to say he said to the 20-yard line or something like that, or maybe it's the 50-yard line, and he has them basically put another boy on his back, and he's marching on his fours, and he's going, and he keeps on telling him, push, 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 push. He thought he was going to the 50, he ended up doing it across the entire field. It was something he was able to grow, but in and of itself, he couldn't see. In the Army, there's many times where we would do exercises and training and whatnot. And so junior soldiers, whether it was junior officers learning to lead soldiers, or for me, learning to lead lower enlisted, we would be put in charge of a new maneuver, or at least new to us, or an evolution. You can think of being in charge of teaching new soldiers how to shoot better. It's not something I just hand on a rifle and say, all right, you pull the trigger, pew, 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 that's okay, good, now you're good to go. No, we go through the fundamentals, and we make our way through, and we go back over them. In each case, these interns, again, aren't just released into the wild. At the beginning of Luke 9, as Ed had started the story of the disciples being sent out, Jesus sends the 12 out. And what does he send them out to do? He sends them out to proclaim the kingdom of God and to heal the sick. In Luke 9:10, when the apostles returned, it says in Luke 9:10, when the apostles returned, they reported to Jesus what they had done. Then he took them with him, and they withdrew by themselves to a town called Bethsaida. So last week we talked a lot about sending, about being delegated. This week we're talking about, what happened when they returned? When they returned, Jesus kind of did a debriefing, right? He followed up with them. He said, I kind of imagine this like them sitting in a circle around maybe a small bonfire, maybe a big bonfire, and they're kind of exchanging their stories, and telling each other, what happened, and maybe there's a little bit of feedback. Okay, excuse me. I'm live. I'm taping a sermon upstairs. You're supposed to be upstairs. Go. 2 seconds. Come on. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Yes. So back to my story. They're sitting around. They're in their lawn chairs, sitting on a bonfire. I get it, no lawn chairs back then. But they're sharing experiences and what they had accomplished. Right? It says that what they came back and told them what they had done. In the Army, we have a thing called AAR. It's actually coined by the Army. It's the After Action Review, and a lot of organizations use it now. But the idea is to have a kind of a process where the team members come back, they talk, they analyze what happened, again, the good or the bad, why it happened, like this worked because of that. But if it didn't work, what can be done to be better in the future? I kind of remember a story that Ayala's told us recently about how they went out and they did a wedding, and they kind of came back and realized there was some things that worked well for that catering event, but there were certain foods that didn't work out. They had talked about maybe adjusting their servers. There was a couple other things they talked about, but again, they kind of looked over what they did and they tried to figure out, okay, how to go forward. And so this can look like disciples after having done a study with somebody. That could be us coming back together and providing each other feedback. Saying, man, when you use this example or this anecdote, it worked really, really well. Maybe this one not so much. It wasn't, or maybe that one might have been appropriate for a different study. Sometimes it's like, okay, how could we, maybe they responded well. So usually that's, those ones are sometimes harder. When you see things go really, really well, it's hard to kind of critique what you did. Sometimes though, it's a lot easier to critique when it went bad. And so it's like, okay, how could we maybe have phrased the questions a little bit better, right? But it's this idea of kind of like taking a step back and let's learn. And that's Jesus did a lot of that. There would be situations, and he would give him maybe a good attaboy, but then he would turn around and say, okay, but here's the truth of what happens in that matter. And we don't know in this situation. We're not given any information other than they had this interaction with Jesus, that they told him what he did. But if we read in Mark 6, he has it's the same version, same story, it's his version. He tells it a little bit more verbosely, and it says, the apostles gathered around Jesus and reported him all they had done and taught. Then, because so many people were coming and going, they did not even have a chance to eat. He said to them, come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest. So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. Sorry, I didn't give verses on that one. That was Mark 6, verses 30 through 32. And so, in a similar effect, so the thing is, they came back and they just started doing some resting. Why resting? So our interns sometimes get stressed out because they're used to being kind of in an academic environment. They're not necessarily used to compiled deliverables. They're used to working forward towards a test and the next test and the next test. And so my work has come up with a bunch of things where kind of on a weekly basis or so, they have mixers or briefs where they go and they seek out maybe a bunch of individual professionals that will be there that are available. They can go talk to them about advice, get feedback. They can talk about what seems to be working, what isn't working, and making sure that they are also communicating with those above them. If something's not going on, it shouldn't just be going to some external person. They shouldn't just be internalizing it. They should be telling those who are in charge of their internship, right? And it's parallel with the principles of association and impartation. We take a step away from life and we kind of recharge, right? We go to a place that's less stressed. Sometimes we would have this feedback time. I would take my interns out to lunch. I have a small budget for doing that as part of the internship program. And so I take them out and say, hey, we're not doing business. Like, just how are you doing? How's it going? How do you feel? Like, no holds barred. If you're feeling stressed or you don't feel like you're being appreciated, let's talk about it. And I've had those conversations. And so when we as disciples, we're out there working too. There's lots of things that can be stressing us. We can feel lots of tension. And so I think Jesus kind of recognized that there was some tension and says, hey, there's a lot going on. They didn't even have time to eat, right? It says they did not even have a chance to eat. And so he says, let's step away, right? And so gives them a chance to rest. I think poignantly, something that happened recently for us was the Christmas party. If you remember that was a chance to kind of celebrate, to take a step back. It wasn't work, it wasn't a study, but it was a chance for us to fellowship, to reconnect and to recollect. But also, like, one of the things we got to do is we got to talk about and encourage those people in the fellowship for things that they had done, things they had brought, advice that they had provided, or services like working at doing different things for the family, whether it's literally part of the service or outside. I mean, just encouraging cards, encouraging words, being available for quiet times or for advice. These things we were able to do, and we were able to feedback, and we got recharged. And I don't know, as we hit that new year, it was nice to, especially amongst all the holiday stuff, you keep it really tense. I felt really relaxed after that. Like, I was recharged. I was ready to go. And so the work restarts, right? Like, we don't get to rest forever because, and we even see this in the story, is fairly shortly after the 12 disciples come back, it says that Jesus sent the 70 or 72 disciples out. But what we kind of get to see is there's a little bit different result, right? We get to, and we'll read in Luke 10. So if you guys move to Luke 10, I'll give you a second to get there. We get to hear their after action review. It says in verse 17, it says the 72, in my translation, returned with joy and said, "Lord, even the demons submitted to us in your name." That's a very different report than we got before, because before all we got is that they returned and told them what happened. Here, they are very, very fired up. It says they had joy. Like, there's no indication whatsoever of any joy from that any emotion from that previous report. It's just they reported. But here, they were full of joy, right? He's like, even the demons submitted to us in your name. So I think it's awesome they recognized that it was in his name. It wasn't of their own power, right? And we see, though, that Jesus, in his supervisory role, kind of takes this serious. And he's a rabbi, right? We've talked about that, and many people have talked about that in their sermons. It says these guys are never going to miss out on an opportunity to kind of turn these events into teaching. If you guys have PureFlix, there's a series called The Chosen. And it's really, really cool. It's actually, when we started watching it right about the time I started reading the book, it really reminded me, their style is that you get to see Jesus kind of taking each opportunity, each lesson, and be able to turn it around. It's like, he was very personal, but he's like, okay, let's learn from these life circumstances. And so the follow-on, his after-action review, his feedback, we start to see in Luke 10:18, excuse me. It says he replied, "I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. I have given you authority to trample on snakes and scorpions and to overcome all the power of the enemy. Nothing will harm you. However, do not rejoice that the spirits submit to you, but rejoice that your names are written in heaven." So we see Jesus, he very much acknowledges, like, you know what, I saw it. I saw Satan fallen from his high place. I saw the impact that you had in this society. But then he reminds them that it's like, it's great that you were able to do that, but recognize too, the important thing is that your name is written in the book of life, right? You are God, of God's chosen people. In organizations, we often do these reviews to check on the growth of employees, right? In my lab, they call them SDRs. They occur yearly. In my opinion, though, they're super ineffectual. And the reason is most of the review is me meeting with a manager I see once a year. He is not involved in my life. He hasn't seen how I grow. He just kind of gleans from a bunch of other people. But those reviews that are effectual are those when you are meeting with people who are in your lives, other disciples. When they see your life, if they Jim comes into my house and he sees my interaction with my kids, and he's like, "Hey, man, it would probably work better if you talk to Jaden this way, because he is emotional, and if you talk to him a little bit softer, and because this is me, I'm a very gruff guy. That's me. I'm a sinful man. I understand that. I'm prideful, but I need to be called back, because if I'm on my own, I don't necessarily fix it. I just kind of keep on going, and I can go, oh, that was bad, and then do it again because I'm not being called higher. And that's what Jesus does. His example is very, very different. He took the opportunity in their associations to impart truth to his disciples that they might grow. Sometimes someone's going to be there in that moment, and they're going to be able to elicit that or sorry, excuse me, solicit that feedback. They can, would you like some feedback? That was kind of rough. Other times we have to just be able to say, as we grow as disciples, hopefully we're able to say, okay, that was bad. I need to go talk to someone, right? So is that something we do daily? I mean, certainly for our kids, is we're like, making sure they clean their room, they brush their teeth, how they interact with one another. That is certainly something that they're going to get input on a daily basis. And if it's, if you're at work, that potentially could have something as well, right? A lot of times as disciples, unless of course we make a deliberate effort, we don't necessarily see each other every day. So is it weekly? Certainly we up till now have we had church service, we have midweeks or small groups. We do get together for Bible studies. Ed and I get together for coffee once a week, more often than not. Those are definitely good times too. But what I want to do is make sure that we understand that we don't have to wait for some kind of scheduled thing. And oftentimes that's not when we need it most, right? It really is kind of more event driven. If I get cut off in traffic, right? And sometimes I can very quickly pray and go about it. But if it ruins my day, if it just keeps on rolling about, I need to do something about it. Or as you're preparing for a presentation in Windows, even though you told it not to update, it updates, and it takes hours and hours and hours. Totally had an attitude about that. Totally had to confess. Totally had to work through it. But I love, again, that Jim has brought this up several times, the scripture of 2 Timothy 3:16, that all scripture is God-breathed and is useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness. And to be able to come to a disciple, to have someone come into your life and say, hey, this is where you need help, because there are moments where it's teaching, right? Like that's kind of what we're doing right now. It's class, right? We read the things that Jesus was doing. We see that he did that a lot, right? He would get up on a hill, or he'd stand in a fishing boat and he'd preach to the masses, right? Sometimes he'd give smaller lessons to his disciples once he came back, because they're like, what does that mean? And he'd come back and he'd explain to them what's really going on. I'm going to take these a little bit in out of order. And there's training, right? I think about it as kind of like, again, at the gym, give me 2 more push-ups, something like that, right? Under Jesus' tutelage, he sends them out to local towns and villages, and they see some results, and then he grabs those 70, he sends them out, and he sees even more results, right? That they're growing, and they do that because they're able to train. You don't go to the gym once or twice a month and expect to see growth. As a matter of fact, you're gonna any growth that you had at some point in time is gonna go away. It's just not gonna be there. You need to do it regularly. It's something that you grow in. Correcting. It's the idea of you're going one direction, you just kind of adjust their trajectory. And this is kind of just what we read, is that they were all excited about the fact that they were taking on the demons, right? But Jesus is like, no, don't think about it that way. Think about the fact that you are in the book of life, right? He's imparting that truth. He's correcting. It's like, he wasn't calling them bad people. He wasn't saying that even what they did was bad. Like casting out the demons, and the power over them, that is awesome. But don't think that way. Think this way, right? It's that idea of correcting. In Mark 19, starting in verse 17 through about 29, it's the story of a demon possessed man, excuse me, or a boy, excuse me, and a man comes to Jesus and he's asking, like, hey, can you cast a demon out of this boy? Your disciples, we asked them to do it, but they couldn't do it. And Jesus, his response is kind of interesting. He's like, oh, you unbelieving generation, he replied. How long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring me the boy. And so he's like, okay, you guys didn't quite figure it out. Let me take care of it. And then we're going to go on to the object lesson, which is, he moves on further. And when the disciples say, well, wait a second. We tried it. It didn't work. You were successful. What was different? And he's like, okay, again, a point of correction, because you had so little faith. In Matthew 7, this is Matthew 17's rendition of it, starting in verse 20. He says, because you had so little faith, truly I tell you, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, Move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. And we see this pattern, again, this repeated pattern throughout Jesus' teachings. Oftentimes, they get closer, and the disciples kind of get closer, but he's like, you don't quite got it. So we're going to circle back through, and we're going to hit that foundation, the fundamentals, right? The fundamentals in this case was faith, right? Faith is hard, right? What is faith? Faith, my campus leader used to call it trusting obedience, right? It's we trust in God and we obey therein because we do trust that God knows what is really going on. And as we seek to evangelize, we need to remember to circle back. Circle back to this. That's why we ran through the foundation series not too long ago. You know, we were going back through the studies. It's not that most of us as disciples hadn't been through the studies, hadn't read those, hadn't had someone read it out to us, hadn't had the notes in our hand. I love the fact that, you know, Haley brought up, you know, a couple weeks ago, the fact that, you know, I've got dates and notes, and I know exactly where I was with these studies. And she's already as young as she is as a disciple, she's already going back through them. And it's like, okay, I've been a disciple for almost 20 years, so a lot of you have. Some of you aren't quite, you know, been disciples that long. But the thing is if we all have to circle back. Why? Because we're human, right? We still fall prey to our flesh. It's easy to be selfish. It's easy to be gluttonous. Right now, I've really struggled with being in this house because because I've not been journaling so much of my food. I realize that I'm eating a whole lot more food than I ought to. I'm being a little bit gluttonous because I'm emotionally eating being stuck in this house. It's like, okay, gotta reel myself back a little bit, you know. There's other things I can grow into by reading the scriptures. I really think about, you know, 1 Corinthians 13 on how we're to love people, or Galatians 5, just, you know, the seeking out the fruits of the Spirit. Again, kind of recounting these, or just even recounting the fact that daily I need to put God's armor on, as it talks about in Ephesians 6, I think. I didn't write it down. I believe it's 6. You know, this week I really could have used those had I read over and over and over, because life has been challenging. And it's when life is challenging, a lot of times we fall back into old behaviors. It's really easy to do that. So sometimes also, I'll back up and say sometimes we don't quite get the lesson too. And I think that's also why we see Jesus kind of like, why don't you get it? You haven't figured this out about the faith. You know, for me, one of the most telling ones is Taylor's series in math. Drove me nuts. I had to take calculus 3 times. The third time at going through calculus 3 is when the Taylor series finally clicked. And I finally understood it. Because I went through it over and over and over. A lesson that the disciples get multiple times is going to be him feeding of the masses. After feeding the 4,000, they're like, oh my gosh, how did he do that? And Jesus is like, whoa, wait a second. Remember before we had 5,000 people? I fed those people. How many basketfuls did you come up with afterwards? And they're like, 12. He's like, don't you get it? I am sufficient for you. So, even his disciples who lived with him, slept with him, traveled with him, had to circle back through, and Jesus called them back through. And he wasn't necessarily mad. He might have been a little bit disappointed, but it doesn't say he rebuked them about it. He just says, hey, I'm correcting you. You got to think about it and recognize I am sufficient. And that's what we do with the scriptures. We just go back through and we have to re-internalize it so we understand. And this is where we see Jesus' patience. Certainly, if I have to tell my kids, clean your room, 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 the kids should probably be doing that. But at some point, it's like, oh, I'm frustrated, right? Like, I can't be like that. And we see that Jesus' his patience really shines through as he responds. Had he responded with insults and saying, you guys, you stupid, whatever, like, it wouldn't have worked, right? Instead, he tries to lead them towards truth. And again, in this case, that he is sufficient for them. Again, when we're training our kids to clean a room, we don't just sit there and send them, we don't just nonchalantly say, you need to go clean your room and, you know, send them on their merry way, because good luck. That's not happening, right? Especially when they're young. You know, we're starting to do this with Bella, you know, again, singing the cleanup song. We work alongside them. And as they get older, as they progress, we can potentially send them to their room and say, go clean your room. And when they come tell us it's clean, we're like, sure it is. So we go upstairs, we check. It's not. We kind of correct them. We might even help them with the correction. And then we keep doing that. And eventually we hope, we pray, that at some point our kids will clean their room. And when they say it's clean, it'll actually be clean. The only other part of 2 Timothy 3:16 we hadn't talked about quite yet is rebuking, and that's kind of, you're bad. But it's criticizing harshly. But the idea is not to criticize us and to put down or to tear them down, to destroy them. Rather, it's to reprove them in such a way that the correction will fix fix an error. It will make their logic valid, their views, in line with truth. Luke 9 has two instances of this. You have one instance where you have a bunch of non-disciples, and when I say non-disciples, it's not part of Jesus' core group, going about and in Jesus' name they're saying, heal this person, and the disciples are incensed. They're like, wait, they're not part of us. Should we tell them to stop? And there's a relatively similar situation where they're incensed as well, in that they're trying to reach out and teach, and they're getting some resistance, especially from the locals in Samaria. And his disciples are like, well, should we call down fire, like, to destroy them? Which, honestly, that's growth to me, because we were talking earlier with disciples, like, they couldn't heal a demon, and yet these guys are talking about pulling down fire. I don't know about you, but I don't know. That seems to be a whole lot of faith to think that they would have the power to pull down fire. But in both situations, Jesus rebukes them. I think really the reason is because he has a goal, right? His goal, he's supervising. He's trying to bring them in. And specifically it says, in the case of, them calling down the fire, he says, I'm not here to destroy. Like, I'm here to save. If we destroy them, if you call down fire, they don't have an opportunity. They won't really have an opportunity. Or those that are around them won't have the opportunity to be saved. I'm going to read a quote from the book real quick, because I think it's very poignant. It very kind of like boils it down. This is the important thing about all of Jesus' supervisory work of his disciples, was that he kept his disciples going towards a goal. And it wasn't just any goal. It says it was a goal he had set before them. And it wasn't something, sorry, I should just read. He did not expect more from his disciples than they could do, but he did expect their best. And this was expected as always to be improved, so as they grew in knowledge and grace. So in other words, they weren't stagnant, but each round they got better. Again, we saw that. He sent out the 12, and he had, some results. And he sent out the 72 a little bit later, and there was growth. There was, like, hopefully the 12 also grew, because it doesn't say they were sent out together, so hopefully they both grew. And the fact is, the 72 weren't getting as much attention as the 12. So the 72 were able to knock something out of the park. He goes on to say his plan of teaching by example, assignment, constant checkup, again, the supervisory role of he would be out there doing it. He would tell them to go do something, and then he'd watch to see how they were doing. It was calculated to bring out the best that was in them. He believed in them. Again, I want to come back a little bit to that commission statement that I had gave earlier. I hope I didn't embarrass Jim by using him as the example for that. But this fact that we are commissioned as evangelists for Christ. Everything that should be happening in our lives as we reach out, as we assist people, as we are evangelizing, as we are teaching those around us, should be in a calculated way to bring them higher. It's not for our glory. I'm not teaching, the people I'm reaching out for my glory, it's for them. We're trying to help them grow closer to God. Remember, we are commissioned as evangelists to conquer this world for Christ. But we can't do so in a vacuum. We do so in community. Again, remember, he sent them out 2 by 2. And during this forced isolation, I know this quarantine, it's really hard to be connected, right? You know, yesterday at the wedding, we were doing a lot of elbow bumps and stuff like that, and being 6 feet apart. And Liz was telling me about a terrible story about how a lot of nurses in certain communities are like, they can't even touch their family. They're afraid because of everything they're exposed to. They don't want to get their family, and so for who knows how long, a lot of these nurses are completely isolating themselves. They're sleeping in different bedrooms than their spouses. They're not giving their kids hugs and kisses goodnight. Like, everything is very remote. That would be like, me as who I am is very much an introvert. I did not realize how much I was used to doing hugs and whatnot until this happened, because I'm like, I'm good. I'll just, stay cloistered in my house, no big deal. And I'm like, show up to the wedding, it's like, oh yeah, I'm not supposed to like run up and reach. And that's hard. But if we communicate with one another, that is how we help each other within the community grow. And evangelism, it makes it somewhat hard too. But the fact is like, Liz was looking, and like, there's tons of churches that are doing online content, trying to reach their people. I saw lots of our churches that are putting out all kinds of online content. And so we can have an impact. I'll embarrass the Bootons a little bit, maybe, I don't know. But yesterday, we had their wedding, and originally their wedding was going to be 150-ish people or whatever. We had to do it online. They had over, excuse me, shortly after the wedding, they had about 1,200 people who had watched the video. By last night when I went to bed, it was 1,800, and by this morning it was over 2,400, about 2,400 hits. So we can have an impact. The fact is that it's spread way larger. That's just, that's kingdom viral, right? But we can do this. We can point people to resources. I love the fact that on WhatsApp, Munjai sent out some questions. I don't have them on me. I wish I hadn't even thought about it till just now. I wish I had them, but it's like, hey, think about these things that we can go through during this quarantine. I believe one of them was like, what are we grateful for? What are we doing in this time? Those type of things, reaching out and trying to help each other, encourage each other, sending out scriptures, that is how we connect. So that's kind of my closeout, is that we just make sure that we are connected. That as we reach out, we're not creating disciples and again just sending them out into the wild, but rather we are bringing them and wrapping them into our community. That is our supervisory role for evangelism. So I have basically 2 announcements. Going forward, we're going to continue having service online. What that's going to look like, because different people are preaching. You're not always going to have, Andrew, I don't think would feel comfortable leading, a whole bunch of songs. Maybe he does. I'm putting words in his mouth, so we haven't talked. So I don't know how it's going to go forward, but amen. We just pray that this all works out. Pray for your fellow disciples. Like I said, this is our community. We want to make sure that through this, that our community is taken care of. And so if you have needs, make sure you communicate those. But on top of that, I don't know if this is providence, but this is a week we were actually going to talk about tithely. So I don't know if you guys have seen the announcement on the Tri-Cities announcement group on WhatsApp, or on the Tri-Cities website, or on the Tri-Cities Facebook page. But we now have a new way to give to the church, because going forward, we still have certain expenses that we're doing, and even outside of that, once the church is back in meeting, it's a way where we can give online. So it's an app. It's on your phone. It's an app that is developed by disciples for disciples. They do allow other faith groups to use it as well, but it really was for us. So if you go onto our Facebook page, you go onto into the WhatsApp announcements, or you go into our actual website, there are links to that app to be able to download, and it's available for iPhones and for Androids. We're gonna sing one more song, and then that'll be it for today. So I'll call my wife in just a sec.